What's up everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're actually going to be fixing something that I've been neglecting on my car for quite some time. If you can see behind me, we're going to be fixing the steering rack. The reason I need a new steering rack is because when I first got my car, I had a power steering leak and I let it go for too long, let it dry up, which, you know, kills the pump, kills the rack. So I've actually rebuilt the power steering pump. Also, the power steering rack boots were ripped, so you know, a bunch of dirt and grime got in there, which probably wore out the gears as well. And even though I let it go too long and it dried up, when I did put fluid in, I actually put power steering fluid, which to me made sense at the time because I didn't read the sticker on the cap which said use ATF fluid. So even though it could be the steering column or the linkage, I'm 100% certain it's the rack, just based off of my lack of knowledge from when I was not a kid, but when I was younger. So behind me we have a version 9 power steering rack from an STI. So this is a 13:1 ratio rack where the stock ones are 15:1. So this is going to be a little bit more responsive. I actually ordered a version 8 steering rack, which this is the common Subaru mounting point that would be used on this. But this one is completely gone. There's a crack here all the way around, which I'll show you close up in a second, but all the way. I couldn't use that, so I got a version 9 steering rack instead. So if you look here on the table, we have everything we're going to need for the version 9 steering rack, which, if you can tell, has what I'm going to call wings, or these tabs, instead of this mounting bracket system. When going from the standard mounting bracket system to this, we're going to need a couple things. Here we have the bolts for the STI steering rack. We got some larger washers and some lock washers so that when you bolt this up, the bolt doesn't want to push the bushing out the other side. We have white line bushings, which I already pressed in. These are the bushings for the version 9 rack. We have the linkage for the version 9 rack, which when I'll show you the one off the car, this is actually a bit longer, so we're going to have to modify it. But you need to use this linkage because the output shaft on the steering rack itself is a couple millimeter larger. And then since we have to cut and shorten the linkage, I got a piece of metal with the inner diameter the same as the outer diameter of the linkage. So when we cut it and shorten it, we'll just throw that on as a sleeve to make sure everything is straight when it's welded. Also, anytime you deal with something that involves O-rings on an old car, definitely replace it. If you look here, I mean, this came on the rack, obviously that's why it's cut, but I got a new O-ring considering the ones that were on my car were completely flattened and broke. So while you're there, you might as well do it right and avoid leaks. And besides that, once you put it on the car, last thing you have to do is this high pressure line bends at a 90 degrees, so make it straight to route into here. Let's go outside and I'll show you exactly why I'm doing this. Alright, so I know I said we're going to do a steering rack, but I also got something for Christmas that I haven't gotten to use yet. Coveralls, baby. Let's go. Whew. Feels good. Alright, let's go. Just to show you the problem, you can see here when the wheel is on, there's a 1/4 inch of play, which is 1, annoying, and 2, unsafe. So this is what we're hopefully going to fix, and then we're actually going to get a better steering response with the STI rack. So it'll be 2 1/4 turns lock to lock instead of 2 1/2 turns lock to lock. Let's get started. Technically, you're not supposed to hit it from that, but I'm not reusing these, so fuck it. take a look down here by the brake boost and the downpipe, right there, there's the linkage, and if it's turned a certain way, you're able to reach it with a normal ratchet with some extensions. So I'm going to take that out right now. Right now I'm not trying to get these lines, but if you look up here, that line and another one right about there, so those are a pain in the ass. There's not much room down here, as you can tell. So yeah, I'm trying to get those out, and then I'll have to undo the linkage, but we're getting there. So real quick look, you could see this one looks fucked. I know it's not just all about looks, but you could see where the boots are broken, all the fluid that was leaking onto it. But what I was saying before is, if you look here at the in and out ports, they're in a slightly different location on the new rack. Also, if you look from here, the version 9 steering rack column is beefier than the stock one, so that's why we have to change the linkage. And here's the linkage I was talking about. You can see the difference. Even though this one's super short and this one's much longer, look at the length of this. So overall, it's not too crazy of a difference, but still, I mean, gonna need to take what, an inch off at least, inch and a quarter. So that's the new one that has to go in. Also, when you take a look at where they mount, you can see this one has the wings that are super beefy, where this one has the bracket that was shown on the version 8 steering rack. But other than that, I'm pretty sure the inner and outer tie rods can be used from the version 9. The boots are good, the outer tie rods are good, and we just have to do the linkage, but now we could bolt this back in. So first things first, I'm going to need to cut this fitting off. This isn't part of the steering rack install, it's just the fact that one of my lines are leaking. So I'm going to get this welded on the hard line and use an AN line instead. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to have to cut the hard line, which this is going to get welded to, and then we'll get to the linkage. What's also nice is that old linkage has play, a little bit of play, not what was seen in the steering wheel. The new linkage is pretty much solid, so that's going to tighten some things up as well as the bushings. So this is a little rig my dad set up to check if these are the same length, and actually when you put this right here, you can see the holes are only about 1 millimeter off. So I'm going to trim this down a little more and then use a piece of pipe to sleeve it before I get it welded. Here's the little sleeve I made. I just have to take the one burr out, but I also tapered the edges so when it gets welded it actually penetrates some, since it's fairly thick. But let's see if it fits. Perfect. I just had to file down this one seam on the inside and fits great. Let's see, is it the correct length? Too long. I gotta file it down quite a bit. 4 or 5 mil. I'm gonna have some hot fingertips. Now we just got to clean up the linkage, get that welded, and then, well, clean up the linkage, mark the angle that it has to be, and then we could get it welded. Now that I've made the sleeve and marked where it has to sit, as well as cleaned it with acetone, we could bring it to the welder and then throw it on the car. So right here, I got the steering rack linkage welded, and of course, great welds as usual, as well as this fitting on the power steering line. Now I'm gonna use some 3/16 dowels, throw the pins in through the linkage, and then get the tops of them welded just in case, as a safety precaution. Got one hole drilled, so let's go to the next. So I'll grind off this end, and then I'll take it back to Bean Fab, and he'll throw a weld over each one. So I fucked up. Even though I got this all welded, the top part of the linkage is supposed to be from the old steering rack linkage. The splines, if you look from this angle, you can see the one on the right, which is from the STI, has fine splines. The one on the left has thick ones. There you go. So we're gonna have to cut this back up and use the linkage from the old one. Hate myself right now. Hey, hey, hey. So I took the pin out and cut the top linkage off. As you can see, the rod from the old linkage is still in there. I'm going to try to drill it out and see what I can do to reuse this sleeve.
Wow, that is great.
That went much.
And did you have it photographed?
Yep, filming right now. Now we can cut the linkage from my car. So it's this longer part, which is the bottom, that we're not using. We're using the top one, but I just checked, and both of these actually fit on the steering column to the car. So I could use either one. So we're going to cut it off right here at the weld. I just got this linkage cleaned up, but it's a couple millimeters too long. So I'm going to grind it down a little bit, measure it, and then go from there. So I got it where it needs to be. It was about 7 and some change inches to the center, which it is right now. It doesn't look as clean as before because it's not butting up here. Now I'm gonna align it, and then we're gonna drill out the hole, drill the pin in. So I drilled the hole through. Now all I gotta do is put the pin in, and then we can go and get this welded again. So I went to Bean Fab, I got this fixed. As you can see, it has the sleeve over it, and the 2 pins I put in got welds put over the top so they don't back out. So this should be good to go now. This is the old steering rack linkage, so that should fit the column. This is the new steering rack linkage, so this should fit the steering rack itself. So let's go put this on the car. Before we put the new rack in the car, we need to measure the tie rods, make sure they're the right length so that the alignment is not super out of whack. Also, we want to make sure the rack is centered exactly so when we put it in the car, everything's dead even. So we're gonna do that right now. Got this fitting welded and clear coated, so we can throw this on. And one thing I didn't tell you was, let's see. And one thing I didn't mention was when I put these new bolts in, I was torquing them down to the 44 foot-pounds as it's specified. And if you can see, these tore the threads straight out of the subframe. So I looked it up, and on the forums it tends to be a really common thing. I found one post where a guy said, considering his stripped out so clean, that he didn't even have to drill it out. He just got a 7/16 coarse thread tap and did that and put in a 7/16 coarse thread bolt. So sadly I won't be able to use the new OEM bolts, and this is taking more time and money out of my day. Here's the 7/16-14 coarse thread tap. I got the matching bolt, so now let's make these threads in the subframe before we could actually finish up this job. So I got the thread tapped and this bolt fits perfect, but take a look right here. It won't go through the steering rack. So I'm gonna go to my dad's shop, drill this out the slightest bit just so that this can slide through, and then we should be good to go and put everything back on. I drilled this part of the bushing out to a 1/2 inch, which now fits the 7/16 bolt perfect. So we'll press this back in, and then we could bolt this in the frame. Mint. Since I got this one fitting welded onto the low pressure power steering line, I decided to test fit it. At the beginning of the video I said one of these lines would have to be bent because this top port is at a different angle, but considering I'm going AN line on both, I don't think I actually have to bend these lines when I do come to putting everything back together. So I don't know if you can see right there. Let me try to zoom in for you. We got the linkage on the rack as well as the steering column. And to make sure you line it up straight, you want your wheel to be centered. I saw somebody said they used the seatbelt as lock, but it was actually pulling the steering wheel this way. And then when I used the bungee cords on the pedal, I was pulling the steering wheel the other way. So together, it's not budging. So I know that's straight. I measured the steering rack, which should be good. Now we just have to tighten all the bolts and put on the tie rods. We could take all this stuff off the steering wheel. And then while we fill this, we're gonna have to turn the wheel back and forth to bleed the system. And then we'll turn the car on, do the same thing for a little bit, and it should be good. So as you can see, I got the car running. I checked for leaks and I didn't see any. The steering wheel is straight, so last thing I have to do is get in alignment and then I can drive it. So that's how you put an STI steering rack into a GC chassis. And that's it for this episode, so I'll see you in the next one.